and welcome back to the Athenian EmpowHer podcast, where we highlight women leaders and their journeys in the professional world pursuing their passions. I'm Isa, and today we have a wonderful guest, Julia Povlak. Julia is a search consultant. Today we'll be learning more about her work as a talent advisor. So whether you're wondering what traits to develop for a future career, how to approach the hiring scene, or just looking for a good story about a successful and inspiring woman, this episode is for you. Julia, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad to have you here for the 6th episode of Season 1. Could you introduce yourself?
Hi there. My name is Julia Povlak. I am an executive search consultant and executive recruiter in the technical and digital space, and I run my own boutique search firm called JGP Recruiting, and I live in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Awesome. So kind of going over what you just introduced yourself with. So you're a CEO. Can you give us an overview of the company you run and how you got into this field?
Sure. Yes, I'm founder and partner and CEO of my company. I currently have 2 employees. So it's my own, as I said, boutique search firm, and I help companies find talent across technology and digital transformation. I originally worked in finance and began, I got a little bit burnt out. I began sharing with my network that I needed to potentially pivot my career. And most of my friends and mentors suggested that my strengths were networking and relationship building, and I should go into recruiting. And so that's when I pivoted my career at that time.
Yeah. And so networking is something I think a lot of teenage girls definitely should be adding to their toolbox, especially when they're going into fields that they've been aiming for such a long time. So kind of just to understand the network scene a little bit more, could you share a moment in your career where you felt the impact of your work, maybe not just professionally, but maybe even personally, and what did that teach you?
Yeah. So to touch upon the networking point, I think that business development, selling, networking, relationship building is the most important thing that any teenager or college kid or somebody's early in their career needs. That's a skill they need to hone immediately. You don't always have to go into selling a product in an industry, but you can be selling yourself, or if you're at a company, you can be potentially selling to, any kind of strategic partners, and that is really important. And relationships and your network is what gets you through your career, and it's really pivotal for anybody in high school or college to begin learning that. In terms of impact of my work, I can probably share one story. I put significant time into finding a candidate for one of my med tech clients. We were looking to revolutionize the radiology space, and they needed someone who understood medical cameras and AI. And so I placed someone incredible, and the work he's done for that company since has helped detect early onset of cancers and save lives.
Wow.
And the work that he's been doing over the years has been really impactful. And so I'm very proud of that search.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think it's really cool to see how you're part of that process and how that buildup is really because of the hiring and the networking process, which is, I think, why your field is especially important nowadays when there's so many different roles within companies and so many specialties. I think that's so important to have.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So you previously mentioned to me that you have a passion for philanthropy. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. I'm passionate about giving back to the community. I'm a Russian Jewish immigrant from the former Soviet Union. And we came to this country, we were surrounded by numerous nonprofits and volunteers who gave their resources to helping us. And I was really moved by their work and always wanted to give back. So I started donating and attending fundraisers probably in my early 20s. That's when I started community organizing and bringing people together, not only for the great causes, but for the purpose of community building. And so, I really, through that work, I noticed when you bring great people together in a room, they can develop relationships and friendships, potential business partnerships, even marriage. Many people have met at my dinner parties, and, especially in my 20s, they met and they married, and now have kids. And so, all that happened at many of my fundraisers, and building that community and having these networks has been crucial. But also giving back to the organizations and the nonprofits that helped us when we came to this country. That was really important to me as well.
Yeah, so you sit at the unique crossroad of talent and impact. How do you see executive recruiting and philanthropy working together to shape the future, specifically in women's leadership?
It's a really good question. I'm trying to think of how talent and impact, how that affects philanthropy. And I suppose, philanthropy, you can fund leadership development. Philanthropy can fund leadership development and can push organizations to be bold in their commitments to equity, for example. Philanthropy can seed new ideas. But to make that impact sustainable, I think we need to change who's at the table, so who's at the leadership helm.
Yeah.
And that's where the recruiting can come in. Like foundations historically, they just hire the safe bet. Like who's been in a previous role at a foundation, who can we hire that's done the same work? I don't know if that's necessarily the right way to go. It's important to think outside the box when hiring a leader for your nonprofit. I think it's also crucial to move the board around. So new blood at the board level is very important. The leaders, you can't have a nonprofit and the board members have been there for 20 years. It's stale. There's no new ideas. They're not in the community, and you need to flip that. And so that's where recruiting can also come in.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think you put it really well. So that's kind of where the possibilities in the future you think is going to be headed. So taking a little bit of a step back, looking at qualities, when you're helping place executives, what traits do you consistently see in successful leaders? What do you often see yourself kind of finding a reoccurring pattern between people you believe are going to be successful or even are successful?
Really good question. I'm a matchmaker, so I don't do the hiring, right? I source candidates and I take deep dive, interview them, I scrub them, scrape them, I ask all the questions, and then I bring them to my client. And so it's really up to my client to make the hiring decision. But I want to make sure that I bring the best of the best. So this is what I look for. I think a successful leader listens more than they speak. So if I'm interviewing them and they're just talking, and they're overly verbose through the interview process, I foresee them being challenged in, for example, hearing their team's ideas or listening to the customers or listening to what their investors have to say. And so I want to make sure that somebody who listens is, I think that's crucial to their success. I'm also looking for a good storyteller, so the way they share their background. They speak plainly, they listen actively, they adapt how they communicate different audiences, they're transparent, and all of that can help earn trust quickly, which makes them a successful leader.
Yeah, I think a lot of our podcast listeners are high school girls, maybe a little bit older, and I think hearing what people like you want to see and want to hear from them is really important, especially when people are kind of planning and engaging in different fields and they're discovering what they like, what they want to get into. I think the hiring process is something that scares a lot of teenagers and a lot of young adults. So kind of hearing that from an expert is definitely more reassuring to see kind of what's needed in these fields and what's like commonly looked for.
Yeah, I do encourage, for the teens especially, confidence and understanding who your audience is probably the two most important things you need to have.
Yeah. This wasn't on the question list, but do you have any specific examples of when you saw those traits? Just another similar story to the first one you told?
Sure. I mean, anybody, who can come in and is confident in the way they speak, is able to share their story that matches and adds up. There's no inconsistencies in their background. That is really attractive, in the storytelling. I place engineering, product, go-to-market, so that consists of sales, business development, marketing, chief marketing officers. And so they need to be able to share their success stories in a way that is understood by various different audiences. And how they pivot those stories is also really important. If they're speaking to an investor or a customer or a CEO, making sure that they know who their audience is and delivering for that is really important.
Yeah. All right, so one of the overarching themes of our podcast and our whole program is kind of how do women join this field and how do women excel, hearing stories from professionals like you and other people we've interviewed. So just to kind of get a sense, what barriers do you still see holding women back from top executive roles, and how can we begin to dismantle them?
Excellent question. So women tend to be more insecure than men. It's an unfortunate thing to say, but it's what I've observed through my recruiting career. Men just kind of go for it. They see a job description, they apply. They just kind of walk in and, even if their background doesn't match the job description, they're just going to apply. Women are more strategic and methodical, so they make sure that they align with the entire job description. So if there's 10 bullet points that are requirements in a job description, women will not apply unless they believe that they fulfill all 10 bullet points. And so they take lesser risks, and men just apply and go for it. And so that is why there's probably more male applicants than female in the marketplace. So I do encourage women to be more aggressive and just be bigger risk takers.
Yeah, I completely agree, and that's kind of tying into my next question, where I was wondering, you've seen all the behind the scenes, all the dynamics at every level. What do you think young women need to know about advocating for themselves in these rooms?
So, as I said, the risk-taking piece is really important, but I think moving quickly is also important. So if you have two people and one person is not overthinking something, they just move forward, they move quickly, they make mistakes, they learn from their mistakes, and then they continue forward and they build something. And then you have the other person who's strategic and methodical, and they lay out all the risks, and they slowly decide to dip their foot in the water. Who's going to be successful first? It's going to be the person that moved quicker and made mistakes quicker and learned from those mistakes. If you just sit and strategize and act later, you're going to miss the boat.
Yeah.
I also encourage women, this is more of a compensation, like money topic. Women tend to not negotiate their compensation as aggressively as men do. And that's a lot of the reason why you'll see reports that women make less than men. It really has to do with an offer going out, and a man is going to aggressively negotiate for more compensation, and a woman is going to just accept what she's offered. And so, again, I encourage women to take bigger risks, negotiate harder for themselves, and be advocates for themselves.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think hearing that, especially from you, kind of shows that there's a lot more capability if you push and you move quickly and you follow all the advice that you just told us.
Right.
So if you could change one thing about how these companies approach hiring, especially when it comes to women, what would it be?
So, a lot of the companies are already instituting gender parity, especially at the top of the org chart, which is great. That hadn't happened before, and companies are doing that. Going back to how I talked about job descriptions where women only apply if they fit the bill, I would recommend companies change job descriptions to be more broad. That will probably attract more women. So a job description is going to have a list of requirements. I would recommend switch that to, instead of requirements, change the word to like nice to have, for example. So then women will say, well, it's not a total requirement, I'm going to apply. And then there will be more women in the pipeline, more women are going to get interviewed, and then they have a higher chance of winning the role.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's just a really impactful change that would really help a lot of women that are kind of going for new jobs or going into new fields. So we ask this question every single podcast to show that everyone has role models, and role models are really important, especially being a woman working in different fields, working different jobs. I think having role models is one of the most important things to kind of help anyone along the process. So I wanted to ask you, do you have any female role models that you look up to? And what traits do you have that they admire? What makes you look up to them, and why are they a role model to you?
Excellent question. I don't have a specific person in mind, but what I can share is I have placed many women at the executive level. But also I've placed women at the director and manager level as well. And I have to say, the ones I admire are really the risk takers, the great negotiators, the strong storytellers. And also what I admire about the placement, the female placement I made, is the women who are impact driven. So if they want to go into healthcare or med tech, and it's because they want to be there for the greater good, those people I truly, truly admire. They're not just going to some, social media company to make money. They're actually going into a space where people are going to live better lives. There's going to be healthier outcomes. And the impact-driven women I'm very much impressed by and I admire.
Yeah, I completely agree. Again, I feel like so many of these traits you can kind of see in different women and people in general, and you see those and then you instantly admire them, or you, in your case, see those and you say, oh, that fits the role, that is what the company wanted. And I think also having that sense where you can see those traits and know what to do with them is really impressive to me, and I think that's what makes you so good at your job.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
For a high school audience, what I really would encourage is for everyone to, again, hone the skills of networking and being able to be a good storyteller. Especially right now also, I'm a big fan of summer internships for college kids. For high school kids, I really encourage you guys to have just a good time, but also spend some free time doing research, less social media, more research around AI, business development, how you can be a good storyteller, how you can have better confidence. And I think that's really important at the high school level. At the college level, what's really important is internships during the summer and understanding how business works, how companies operate, what industries there are. And then when it comes to recruiting, I don't necessarily recommend that after college people go into recruiting. I think going into industry is really important first. Going into a corporation, whether it's finance or consulting or healthcare, you have to be in the industry for a bit before you get into recruiting.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That was an amazing end, and I think our audience will really enjoy hearing that, especially as a lot of the women that listen to our podcast are currently going through that process, whether they're scared about applying to colleges or they're in college and they're looking to what the next step is. I think hearing that from a professional, which is kind of our overall goal with these podcasts, is hearing from professionals and seeing how that might help girls pave the way and find their path. So I think that answer was perfect. For everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed our 6th episode of our EmpowHer podcast. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, check out our website, and watch our interviews on YouTube. We've got more amazing stories and guests coming your way, so stay tuned.